Hello and welcome to Virtual Concert Hall's live music channel. Thank you for joining us today for a really exciting show. Our channel is dedicated to bringing live performances and events from international artists delivered to audiences from around the globe. Hello, welcome to Virtual Concert Hall's live music channel. My name is Chris Au, and I will be your host for today's show. This is a very special show. It's a special feature on Maestro Theodore Kuchar. I had a fantastic time chatting with him. He is currently the director of, oh my gosh, many different festivals around the world, especially in Australia, but primarily the Lviv Philharmonic Orchestra in Ukraine. And this is a really exciting orchestra that has recorded so many different albums, so many different composers, and they're a really special orchestra. And not only are we going to see a show with the Lviv Philharmonic Orchestra with our very own Jennifer Wang later on next week, but also we're going to feature him today in an interview that I did with him. This interview was really interesting. I didn't know he had the chance to work and get to know Laurent Mazel, one of the legendary conductors of the world. I didn't know that he had the chance to work with such incredible musicians, tour all over Europe and Asia with this Lviv Philharmonic Orchestra. And he has recorded so many different composers too, not just the usual you're used to hearing, but also many different composers, one of which we're going to hear today, Thomas de Hartmann. Now, we are not going to leave you with just talking today. We're going to also feature some incredible music, the violin concerto of Thomas de Hartmann, and I'm looking forward to having your responses on what you thought about this piece of music, which isn't heard quite as often. Now, I would like to talk a little bit also about what this event is about. Theodore Kuchar, the maestro here, is part of our colORCHESTRA program, which involves live auditions, right? We have these partners that we have worked together with, and these partners are really important because they offer you and maybe your students, maybe music lovers, most importantly, musicians, an opportunity to play with orchestra, right? I will talk a little bit more about why it's important to play with orchestra as a musician. And as a pianist, I know for sure that orchestras just don't come by often. You can't just go to your local community center and play with them on the weekend, but you have to audition. So these colORCHESTRA auditions give you an opportunity as a musician to do just that. And I think that's really valuable. The Carnegie Hall and colORCHESTRA worldwide auditions are held online in this virtual platform that we have and are organized by Artist Ventures, Sounds Perceivo, Virtual Concert Halls in collaboration with Prize Attractions, Vocal Arts Management, and Cicero Music and Art. So let me talk about what that is exactly, which is really quite interesting. It is a combination of what we do, which is an attraction of different artists and put them onto stages, especially online. And we connect all these musicians with actual management and event organizing and recording agents and recording labels so that you as a musician, whether you're in school or after school, you get a chance to live the life of a musician and not just hope that one day you win a competition and someone will hand you a career. You get to do that yourself. So visit our website at soundexpressivacompetition.com for more information on how to be featured with some of the world's prominent orchestras. I want to send you now, before we go on to talk about this interview with Maestro Kuchar, a little glimpse of what the colORCHESTRA auditions look like. So as you can see, we are partnered up with so many different orchestras. Right, Sound Expressive Competition is basically like an audition platform, you can say, where different musicians can submit their repertoire and audition live and get live feedback from judges. And then you get to play with these orchestras that are featured in that video you just saw. Isn't that special? It's very, very cool. So I want to talk a little bit about the Lviv Philharmonic Orchestra of Ukraine, which has done so many different recordings, and they are a phenomenal orchestra, one of which is touring all over the world and is still functioning. They do concerts at least once a week, twice, three times a week, and they're really, really well attended in Ukraine. In spite of the political situation, in spite of the war, there are still concerts going on. I think arts is such an important and integral part of making people feel as if life is going on and there's still something to look forward to. This opportunity to perform with orchestra, as I was alluding to before, is incredible. It's really special because you get to play these concerti you've heard so many times by these great artists that you know, and to be immersed within an orchestra and hear the sound and have a conductor just follow you and also guide you through these monumental pieces is extraordinary. And we've had many incredible musicians be a part of what we do and perform incredible pieces, which you'll hear actually next Tuesday. The wonderful Jennifer Savage played the Gershwin Piano Concerto last December with the Lviv Philharmonic Orchestra, amidst the craziness of what is, a war going on in their country. But it happened, and we have a recording very special for you that's coming very soon. Now, in this interview you're about to see, we talk about auditioning. Maestro Kuchar and I talk about auditioning, what it means to audition for orchestras, and what you do as a musician trying to get into these orchestras. We talk about his experience as a conductor, working with Lauren Mazel, how extensive the training is to be a conductor, to be a musician, what the history of the Lviv Philharmonic Orchestra was, especially when they got these recording contracts with Naxos. Right, and he knew the founder and director of Naxos for such a long time that there's all these stories, which we're gonna hopefully do a part 2 of this interview with him, because I think there's so many gold nuggets of stories to dig up and to talk about and to discuss, which all gives value and an impact to hopefully our listeners who look at this and see that the music sphere is a lot bigger than the school that they attend. It's a lot bigger than the summer festivals that they're planning this summer. That is a lot bigger than that. And yeah, so without further ado, I think it's time to play this interview. Please enjoy this interview with myself and Maestro Kuchar, and it was so insightful. I really hope you enjoy. Today, I have the great privilege of interviewing the multiple award-winning conductor, Theodore Kuchar, who is one of the most recorded conductor of his generation and appears on over 150 compact discs for Naxos, Berlin Classics and Toccata Classic labels. He presently serves as principal conductor of the Lviv National Philharmonic Orchestra of Ukraine, which is the same orchestra which we are featuring in this recording you're about to see. So without further ado, let's welcome him onto stage and let's have a wonderful chat with him. Hello, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Greetings, Chris. Thank you for having me.
It's wonderful to have you. So this concert in Lviv happened in December 2024. How was it? How did it come about? And what was the program? Was there a theme to this show?
Well, this concert, as we're now speaking, in the middle of April of 2025, that concert took place in the middle of December, I believe, of 2024. So almost half a year ago. And this was the first collaboration of the orchestra and myself with the pianist Jennifer Savage, who was recommended to me by Jack Price, and based on that recommendation, we created this collaboration. You should understand that the Lviv National Philharmonic Orchestra of Ukraine has a very active concert life. It performs 3 to 4 times a week in Lviv. The orchestra tours very often throughout Europe. I think they're right now in the middle of their 4th or 5th tour, just in these first 4 months of 2025. The orchestra and I have had 2 major tours during the past year and a half. In 2023, we had a 40-concert tour of the United States, which started in Florida, took us through Carnegie Hall in New York City. And then as we moved west, we went through Indianapolis, Chicago. Earlier in this concert season, in October of 24, we had a 3-week tour of the United Kingdom. So the orchestra and I had concerts in London, Birmingham, and other major locations in the UK. So the orchestra is very actively concertizing, not only at home in Ukraine, but on other continents. As you mentioned in the very beginning, we have had a very fortunate recording activity, which, in this day and age certainly isn't to be taken for granted as it was 20 and 30 years ago. The whole concept of the classical recording industry as we knew it through the second half of the 20th century and during the early 2000s naturally has changed very drastically. And I think so much of our profession has changed from the time of the development of the internet, in fact. Because, for example, let's look at when the compact disc developed, which was approximately 1980. That's 1979, 1980. At that point, every major label was recording cycles of the most standard through the repertoire of the 20th century, which had not necessarily been given so much time in the days of the LP. Labels were recording not just sonic spectaculars, but they were recording entire cycles of given composers. And what an exciting time it was. I was a kid in those days, but to build a library, to be exposed to how many different cycles of symphonies of Beethoven, Brahms, Shostakovich, Prokofiev, to have the possibility of all of these things, which earlier was not so easy, was a great education, an education that no institution could have given a young music student if you wanted to take advantage of it. But as with all new technologies, as the internet developed, there were many pluses, but also minuses as far as our profession. Why was the world of classical music, the whole concept of the concert industry, so proactive? It's because record labels promoted the artists that they were making their names from. I remember as a child in the 70s, in the 80s, you went into a big department store like Macy's, many drug stores. They sold classical recordings. If you can imagine that most of the major department stores in America had not just music departments, but they had a classical music section where you had full access to whether it was LPs, whether it was compact discs. And wherever you had such departments, you looked on the walls and you saw posters of Mstislav Rostropovich, Itzhak Perlman, James Galway, Leonard Bernstein, Lauren Mazel. These people, even if you didn't follow serious music, they were household names. And this is because the record labels were largely promoting their product. With the development of the internet and having free access through YouTube, for example, to so many things, clearly the major record labels were taking a less active role. They were not putting out as frequent a product. I think as unionization, especially in the United States, made the cost of engaging orchestras so expensive, This also played a very significant role on the recording identities of the major American orchestras. But then, from another point of view, again, before the internet had fully developed, and in fact, before the internet was even an active player, companies such as Naxos, budget labels, which when Naxos was beginning in the late 80s, in the early 90s, Naxos was selling its product for about 1/3 the price of the major labels.
Mm-hmm.
And there's an evolution which has been involved with, I think, the world of classical music, but specifically through the recording industry, to where we are right now, which has taken its very great role on how orchestras today are forced to exist to make themselves known. And with the glitches along the way, such as COVID, for example, in which many orchestras simply had to shut their doors for extended periods of time,
Mm-hmm.
I can say to you with very clear confidence that the Lviv National Philharmonic Orchestra of Ukraine, from the beginning of the COVID outbreak, certainly through the first year, was the most active orchestra in the world. Because even when many orchestras in the United States, in Europe, Australia, Asia were forced to cease operations temporarily,
Mm-hmm.
We found ways to keep our activities going on a daily basis, even though it seemed like the world around us had come to an end. Musicians wore masks. Every player in the orchestra had their own stand. They were spread apart. And naturally, we were not doing big repertoire, but a lot of classical repertoire of the classical period, in which the instrumental demands were not as large as one progressed through the 19th century and then to the 20th century. The orchestra and I were largely giving live concerts, which were being distributed online, live. And I think on some level, even today, although the concert life is largely returned to a sense of normalcy, I still think that there is something left in the mentalities of some people. I won't be specific because I can't be specific, but I think there are especially older people.
Okay.
To go to a live concert means usually going into groups of large people, amongst large groups of people. And it's not the concept of, I think, sitting in a concert hall where you're surrounded by people in front, to the sides, and back of you, listening to a concert. But I think even much more simply, people have to go to the toilet. Ladies at intermission, especially in older concert halls, where you can have one toilet for an entire main floor, which seats 1,000 people, and there's only 2 or 3 stalls. The lines can, I mean, I've seen this quite often walking at interval in concert halls that I'm working in, and it's incredible how long the intermissions have to be, simply so people can deal with their physical needs.
Right.
And a lot of this has taken its toll on where we are right now. But I'm going off on a tangent right now.
No, so tell me, with this, I want to ask, what do you think the recording industry, or at least do you still see an importance in recordings, especially when not only are there so many since, like you said, the 80s, but that so many orchestras have done the full cycles. And I want to just pivot a little bit by saying also that you've recorded composers, American composers and others that are not as well known, like Roy Harris, Paul Creston, Morton Gould, and of course you've done the ones that are more well known, Prokofiev and Shostakovich. So where is the recording industry now for you personally?
Look, I can say to you that the life that I have in the concert hall is almost a complete contrast to the life I have when I'm making recordings. The
okay.
orchestra and I are making recordings, but look, the days of recording cycles of Beethoven, Brahms, in my case, Prokofiev symphonies, Linikov symphonies, Yevhen Stankovich symphonies, these days are probably finished.
Okay.
The money that it costs a recording label or a sponsor for a recording label to record an entire cycle of works, orchestral works in my case, by a particular composer, there's so much available on YouTube that people can access at any moment, not to mention so many recordings which are not actually commercial recordings, but just live concerts, which have been posted. There's not a financial possibility that exists to repeat so many of these cycles and repertoire, which already exist. But I can tell you that the activity that I had in my own personal life, the recordings, we were, how shall I say, we were cranking out 10 to 12
prolific. There's so much
a year. The orchestra and I mean, can you imagine? For me, it was an incredible education, because almost all of the repertoire, the symphonies of Nielsen, of Prokofiev, Yatoshinsky, the Ukrainian symphonist. I was performing all of this for the first time. Some of the things we played in concert immediately before the recordings, but not always. It was an education which you could not have gotten in any conservatory, in any university music school. And my goodness, the orchestra, the National Symphony of Ukraine, with whom I was working in the 90s and early 2000s, what an education for an orchestra, which was used to having 2 weeks of rehearsals for one concert.
I see.
Suddenly, when Naxos opened the doors for us, when Klaus Heymann, who changed my life, changed the life of not only the National Symphony of Ukraine, but Klaus Heymann changed the life of the recording industry with what he and Naxos have subsequently done. The orchestra went from an orchestra which rehearsed repertoire which it had seen many times before, 2 weeks per concert, which no orchestra can afford today, to realizing that we have a recording project. We have to finish this all Prokofiev album, or this all Walter Piston album. We have 4 sessions to do it. The panic, the nerves, the stress when this all started. People looked at me, my goodness, maestro, this is the first time any orchestra from our country is going to be on an international label. We have to be sure it's good. Maestro, we don't know this repertoire. Maestro, we normally for a Tchaikovsky program, we have 2 weeks of rehearsals. How are we going to do it? Well, you know what? When the money was on the line, when the 90s, the post-Soviet decade in Ukraine, and I think all former Eastern Bloc countries financially were in their existences were critical, because I remember in Ukraine in those days, there I was, the general director and principal conductor of the National Symphony of Ukraine. So I was not only responsible for waving my arms, I was the chief administrator. I was the chief executive of the orchestra. I was responsible for the financial existence. I was responsible for all administrative duties. Well, the realities of Ukraine during the 90s were such that governmental institutions, whether schools, universities, hospitals, orchestras, opera houses, these institutions which were dependent upon government finances,
Right.
they were going 6, 8, I remember once as many as 10 months without getting their salaries. The country was broke.
Wow.
But yet, I never realized the seriousness of it until now, when people now speak to me about that which took place 25 years ago. And they say to me, Maestro, I don't know if you realize, I remember how people were giving you a hard time in the early days about the Naxos recordings, that we can't do this, that why are we doing this? Not only did those recordings allow us to feed our families, but with the money that we made, I was able to buy the first violin for my daughter so-and-so, who, maybe is now playing in the Concertgebouw Orchestra or went on to some very great, musical career. People who are now in their, mid-20s, approaching 30 years old, they've gone to have great careers. Or this one's son or daughter that went on to become doctors. If not for those recordings, I couldn't have paid the bribe to get Natalia or Roman into medical school. And I think I could write a book on the incidents and stories that those Naxos recordings gave to the orchestra, because it was a very difficult time. But on the other hand, the orchestra became a household name. Every classical music station, whether it was the ABC in Australia, whether it was WCLV in Cleveland, whether it was the BBC in London, these Naxos recordings were becoming a part of people's musical existences, those who listen to classical music regularly. And as a result of the numerous recordings, the orchestra started touring very regularly. So with the National Symphony of Ukraine in those days, we'd been to Australia, we'd been to Hong Kong, we'd been to the UK, we'd been to the United States. Without those recordings, it wouldn't have happened. Today, as I go back to your initial question, the repertoire that many orchestras, not only we, many orchestras were recording, I think at least 95% of that repertoire, which everybody was recording and actively recording in those days, that repertoire will never be recorded again, at least in the near future. I spoke to you about the availability, internet, the dollars and cents, the financial realities, which are required to make even a single recording nowadays. Yet we remain not as active as in the 90s, but I would say that we still are making 8 to 10 recordings a year. And in almost all cases, it's music by living composers. Composers, for example, I have 2 projects in August.
Oh, wonderful.
2 American composers. One composer, Richard Sortome, who 2 of the concertos on the disc were Cleveland Orchestra commissions. Another American composer, Larry Lipkis, 3 concertos of his, the concerto for bass trombone, concerto for bassoon, concerto for violin. Well, the bass trombone concerto was commissioned and premiered by the Los Angeles Philharmonic and Esa-Pekka Salonen. The bassoon concerto was premiered by the Houston Symphony. But yet, for a living composer, despite whatever successes they may have had, I often make the analogy that a recording for a composer, a living composer, or a young soloist is kind of like a business card for a real estate agent. You can show the most wonderful residence for the most affordable or the most intelligent price, but until you can put the business card in your client's hands, you're not really regarded as legitimate. And I think In the case of being a composer, being a young soloist with aspirations, you can spend as many hours as there are in the day telling about your accomplishments and who commissioned and where your works have been played. But ultimately, until you can put a recording in the person's hands, it's very difficult to get the person you're trying to present your realities to take you seriously.
I really love that you're saying this because I'm a pianist and a lot of my fellow colleagues they're all trying so hard to win big competitions worldwide, and sometimes they're getting through the first round, sometimes they're not, sometimes they get to the finals, and it's wonderful now that we can watch a lot of these performances on stage. But I've always told them when they ask me, oh, what should I do now that I have all these accolades? I'm like, well, you should make a proper recording. And I know it's a little undervalued at the moment because there's so many recordings of the same sonata, of the same concerto. But I agree with you so wholeheartedly that until you have a recording, a CD or something, it's like a business card. It really showcases the best of what you have to offer, not just a live performance, but a something that's curated, that's on a disc. And you can watch the disc on YouTube or listen to it on Spotify or whatever. But at least having that is like this is my brand and this is what I represent. Is this what you're going with this whole like recording for now? What we're doing with recordings?
Well, Chris, let me say to you this. For example, when I was a kid, if somebody mentioned to you, I have to win a competition, what did that mean? That meant probably the Tchaikovsky competition, maybe the Queen Elizabeth competition. Okay, so going back, let's say to the 80s, if some young, ambitious musician with aspirations of becoming a great soloist spoke about winning a major competition, he or she were likely referring to either the Tchaikovsky competition, the Queen Elizabeth competition. Okay, so there was a Leeds competition, an Indianapolis violin competition, which still during the lifetime of Joseph Gingold was established. You could count on one hand competitions which could be life-changing. But even with such competitions, if you didn't win the first prize, and there's nothing wrong with winning the fifth prize in the Tchaikovsky competition, because the person who won fifth today may very easily win the second prize tomorrow or the first prize the day before yesterday. Competitions which often are predetermined are just as easily it's like an audition. The person who auditions for the Cleveland Orchestra today and comes in second out of 450 candidates for that 1 second violin position, the person who came in second place ultimately walks away from that competition as the person who was number 450. But that same person tomorrow can go audition for the Fresno Philharmonic in Fresno, California, to become the concertmaster, or the Sydney Symphony in Australia, and could be successful there. Competitions, auditions are all too often the luck of the draw. And there's a lot of good luck. I mean, I've been on both sides of it. I've been on the side that played in my early 20s. And how many times have I been on audition committees that have listened? I mean, can you imagine what it's like listening to over 200 violinists in one day?
That's a lot. It's
a lot. And I can tell you, more often than not, 90% of those people we listened to were all deserving of walking out of that competition with some level of success. But what I'm saying is that in previous times, competitions were largely the one way of establishing a solo career. But unfortunately, that mentality still exists on some level, certainly in Eastern Europe. In America, there's been a much greater emphasis today in the conservatories, in major music schools within universities, of preparing their students for professional existence, which means getting a great orchestra job. The competition to win a major orchestra position today, I think, is certainly no less than it was going to a solo competition 20, 30, 40 years ago. The competition is so severe nowadays that anybody who goes to audition for an orchestra, certainly in the United States or Europe or Australia, probably Asia, if you don't go into an orchestral audition, a major orchestral audition, knowing those two contrasting movements of solo Bach, a movement of a concerto, and those 8, 10, 15 orchestral excerpts, which are going to be required of you. If you don't go into those auditions playing with the same artistic professionalism, virtuosity, that anybody going into a solo competition, you don't stand a chance to win that job. The expectations of going to an audition, because of the level of competition, is so high, and there's so many deserving people. This opens up another question. People talk about the top 5 orchestras. I don't think there's a top 5 orchestras. I think there's a top 25 or 55 or 105 orchestras. Like I said, the person who comes in second in the audition in New York or Cleveland or Chicago may very well come in first tomorrow in Denver or in Fresno or in Sydney. And we live in a very competitive world today.
Yeah.
I go back to your question. A very close friend of mine, Martin Chalifour, who has been the concertmaster of the Los Angeles Philharmonic for a number of decades, and before that was the associate concertmaster of the Cleveland Orchestra. I believe he came in 5th place in the Tchaikovsky competition. Of course, everybody goes to the Tchaikovsky competition with ambitions of solo career. But you know what? Even the first prize winners of 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, try to remember their names. I don't remember who they are. Many of them went on to teach. Many of them went on to have major orchestra positions. A young Ukrainian violinist who I'm a big fan of. She won a top 5 prize in the Queen Elizabeth competition in Brussels. I once at a pre-concert lecture introduced her and said that she won the 5th prize in the Queen Elizabeth competition. She gave me no peace after that. She was furious. She was hysterical with me. She says, "You insulted me. You degraded me in front of those people." I said, "What did I do?" And Vladislava Luchenko is her name. I said, you don't have a bigger fan than me. I've done everything I can. I engaged you for this tour. We're here together. You told them that I came in 5th place in a competition. Do you think I'm not insulted by that? How could you?
Wow. I see.
I would not say to come in 5th prize, to win the 5th prize or 5th place in a competition like that is a failure. But as I said earlier, the person who came in 5th today could very easily come in 1st tomorrow. She played the most wonderful Brahms concerto that evening with me. And the following evening, I forget if it was Miami or Cleveland, she played the most wonderful Sibelius concerto.
Right.
careers and success are a relative thing. And we live in such a competitive world. I'm sorry that I've gone off on tangent. We've talked about recordings.
No, it's very, very good. Yeah.
But go ahead, Chris.
No, I just wanted to wrap up by sort of asking you, in your experience, because you've had such experience of orchestras all around the world, from Venezuela and Australia and in Europe and in the US, and what do you see now as the role of an orchestra within our society, within our culture? And you can speak to, what you know most, which is probably the orchestras in Ukraine. But just as a concept, what do you think the role of an orchestra really is in our society, in our culture?
I'm not sure if I was 20 years old today that I would be a professional musician. I'm almost. I was about to say I'm almost 100% sure. I will say I'm absolutely 99% sure I would not be a musician today if I was in my student years. Look, in the days, I started with the violin. I changed to the viola when I was 17. And at that stage, I loved everything associated with orchestral music. I delivered newspapers as a kid. I shoveled driveways, and Cleveland was a very good place for such a business. When I was 15 years old, $5 a driveway. And my parents were infuriated because we got up every morning at 4:30, my brother and I, to deliver newspapers. In the winters, as I said, shoveling driveways was a very thriving business for those of us who had shovels. I spent all of my money buying LPs. And I was fanatic. I also, this was in the late 70s, early 80s. I bought myself subscription to the Cleveland Orchestra. I mean, how many 15, 16-year-old kids were going every Friday or every Saturday night to hear symphony concerts? But you know what? When we had such an access to the greatest soloists of our day, the greatest orchestra in the world, arguably. There's no such thing as the greatest orchestra or the greatest violinist. It's impossible to say. There are many of them, but there are the top level. But on a weekly basis, to see Lauren Moselle, Colin Davis, Leonard Bernstein, Seiji Ozawa, soloists I don't have to mention to you, whether it was Lynn Harrell, Yo-Yo Ma, Rostropovich, Perlman, Zuckerman, Isaac Stern in those days. I mean, this is the diet that I grew up on. And fortunately, every one of them I got to perform with as a colleague about 5 years later.
Fantastic. You ate well?
Yes, and it shows. It shows. But look, that was an education. It was an inspiration. It was a driving force. And I was a pitcher in high school, a quarterback. And I guess the equivalent in our profession is to become the conductor. So although my parents kept me on a very tight leash, had to practice, an hour a day, I was fortunate enough to have absolutely the best teachers possible. I had the dream of becoming a conductor. And I think one of the most important parts, and I didn't understand this, I tell this in Ukraine all the time during my master classes. I tell all young conductors, whatever instrumental education or training you had, don't ever let go of that instrument. It's funny that in Ukraine, the major conservatories have such active, concentrated programs for orchestral and opera conductors. I mean, you get a degree in orchestral conducting or in operatic conducting. Only country in the world where there are more conductors than violinists.
Wow.
But I don't think I could ever have been the conductor I am if I didn't play chamber music.
Right.
If I was not an orchestral player. I begged my parents when I was in my early 20s, I want to go to this conductor's course. I want to go to a conductor's course and study with this one in the summer. My mother looked at me and says, you want to be a conductor? Go to your room and practice. And I said, what does practicing the viola have to do with becoming a conductor? She said, someday you'll win an audition, you'll win a solid job, and you can look at as many great conductors as you want to. Well, I didn't realize at the time because it's not what I wanted to hear, but she was absolutely right.
She's so wise. That's wise advice.
It was cheaper for her also, wasn't it? But also, as a string player, in those early days, I used to think to myself, my goodness, but how can one conduct a Rachmaninoff or Chopin or Bartók piano concerto without, waving in the wind? I mean, how do you follow? How do you understand with all of that freedom and flexibility and all of that noise? How do you actually conduct? And I have to tell you that playing chamber music, I'm not saying you have to be the best instrumentalist in the world or you can get away with being the worst instrumentalist in the world. Most important thing about playing chamber music actively for a conductor is that you learn how to listen. I think, look, I'd be very happy if you argue with me right now, but whether you're playing a Brahms piano quartet, a string sextet, a viola quintet, or whether you're conducting a Brahms symphony, the architecture, the harmonic language, understanding of what is 2 against 3, what is 6 against 4, all of that is largely the same, whether you're going from the chamber music or to the orchestral literature. Look at Mozart. Today, he composed a divertimento for 1 flute, 1 oboe, 1 bassoon, and 4 horns plus strings. But tomorrow, he was commissioned in the next city to write a symphony with clarinets in it. We have to understand the existence of composers also. That, of course, many composers have written and continue to write without commission. But I think for the great composers of the past, they were largely composing upon commission. Kind of how a chef works in the kitchen of a great restaurant. You prepare what was ordered, but you can't always prepare the meal that you want to. The existence is slightly different. But I go back to being a conductor. When Lauren Moselle, this is in my early Cleveland days, when Moselle had auditions for assistant conductors, resident conductors, apprentice conductors, these auditions were grueling. I remember looking at the list of expectations, and round 2 could have been being given 100 photocopied pages of 100 different works. You had to identify all 100 works from those pages.
Wow.
Round 3, you could have been given a bass line, a melodic line from some known orchestral work, and told to go to the piano and play the rest for me. Harmonize it in the style of what Brahms would have composed there. But round 1 of these auditions, which I didn't understand, round 1 meant every contestant, every applicant showing themselves on their specific instrument.
Okay. Wow.
And I, as a kid, I didn't say, what is the point of a young conductor who I hope has beautiful hands and mannerisms and more hair than what I have on my head, being able to show themselves that? I mean, that's what a conductor does. And I remember I asked Mr. Mazel, I was in the elevator with him. I said, Mr. Mazel, can you please tell me? I'm fascinated. Whatever you asked Mazel, you had to tell me you were fascinated, because those were his expectations. Mr. Mazel, I'm fascinated. Why is it in last week's conducting audition for the assistant position, did you expect every one of the contestants to play their specific instrument, whether it was the piano, the violin, the clarinet, trumpet, whatever it may be? And he said to me, Teddy, the conductor is generally despised by musicians as soon as he or she walks onto the podium. And before you've even opened your mouth, you have at least 50% of them as your enemies before you even started doing your work. He said the success of any conductor is largely based upon respect, the respect that the orchestra has. If the musicians know that you are able to execute, the word was execute, that which you demand of them, there is at least a patience and a tolerance for whatever comes out of the conductor's mouth. If you cannot yourself execute or deliver that which you expect of others, you will not have a long future with that ensemble.
You've lost them.
And
yeah,
I was listening to this and I thought, makes sense, makes sense.
Awesome. Yeah.
And now I tell all young conductors, I mean, you can't imagine. I see a lot of composers who they realize it's difficult, but they want to become conductors. And I ask them when they apply for my conductors academy that I have in Ukraine every August, I ask, what is your instrument? What is your expertise? What is your orchestral experience as a player? Oh, I'm a composer. Oh, that's wonderful that you're a composer, but what is your instrumental background? I mean, if you're a composer, you have to have some proficiency to know what you're composing for.
Yeah.
Oh, no, I took trumpet lessons in high school, but I quit. I just wanted to compose. Well, I hate to break the news to you, but the greatest composers, the most successful composers of any era had some level of proficiency on some instrument. And many of them had proficiency not only on one or two, but many more than that. And you know who I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And even more so, not only did they have proficiency, but the people closest to them while they were composing were the preeminent performers of the day. Whether you look at Brahms, Schumann, there was Joseph Joachim, whether Shostakovich or Prokofiev. Well, Oistra came to me every morning at 9 o'clock and we worked until lunchtime, for 3 hours working on this sonata or that concerto. Rostropovich was coming to me. Richter was coming to me. These great composers. First of all, great composers are great because not only is there some kind of musical substance and genius in what they're doing, but usually the performer, the one executing, wants to play the music. It lends itself well. I think it's very rare that you come across works that are regarded as great music, works, epics of our time, that people say, oh, it's so unviolinistic, or it doesn't lend itself well, it doesn't sit well on the cello, or for the piano. I remember recording those Prokofiev symphonies, and especially numbers 2 and 3.
Uh-huh.
The first violins are playing, in territory where only dogs can hear these high pitches sometimes. The fingers are almost inside the nose, it's so high. And a lot of these first violin parts are very unviolinistic.
Right.
But yet there's a musical substance there, and there is so much which is violinistic that you overlook the difficulties.
You forgive him. Yeah, you forgive.
I mean, there are many people.
Yeah.
Let's take Schnittke, for example. Schnittke contemporary. Oh, I can't listen to it. Oh, but why does Schnittke have so many people who supported and wanted to play his music? Because there was something of such substance which lent itself to playing. That good music is good on many different levels, and all of this, as I spoke, the experience of becoming a conductor, a player, a composer, none of it happens by itself. And
yeah,
the whole point of where we started here about the importance of conducting, the instrumental background, and how one becomes a conductor, which is essential.
Yeah, Maestro, thank you so much for this. This is so full of your advice and stories of especially like Lauren Mazel. I'm sure you have many more of those, and I love
many more.
Yeah. So let's pocket this for now, and let's save up for next time where I get to interview you again, and for you can share more stories, because what you have to offer is so fascinating. Well, it's really wonderful to hear from Maestro Kuchar again. I actually forgot some of his advice that he gave, and I think it's really wonderful to hear this again. This is Virtual Concert Hall's live music channel. We're really pleased to be reviewing and looking back on this interview I did with Maestro Kuchar just a week or two ago. And he is the director of the Lviv National Philharmonic of Ukraine, and it's a fantastic orchestra with an incredible legacy of recordings. Maestro Kuchar is also one of the most recorded conductors on the planet, and he's done recordings of so many different composers, from contemporary American composers to Russian composers, Ukrainian composers, and this is just the beginning. So I really encourage everybody who's watching to look up Maestro Kuchar and his recordings, but also to look into our co-orchestra auditions, which the goal of which is to allow musicians to have a chance to audition for orchestras. Usually, a lot of these orchestras, you can maybe win a concerto competition, perhaps, or if you know the conductor, you might have a chance to play there. But this allows a bit more of an international, worldwide audition for different orchestras, and there's so many of them coming up. So please check them out on our website at www.soundexpressivacompetition.com. I'm sure you'll be fascinated with what we have to offer and all the different opportunities that are available. The goal of the co-orchestra auditions is to encourage and nurture, reward musicians who are proactive about sharing their art and developing their own careers. So whether you're in school or freelancing or trying to figure it out, this is a wonderful opportunity. And along with Sound Expressiva, we have some incredible partners that are providing opportunities to musicians such as yourselves to discover their own unique voice, take initiative, present themselves on their own terms, and carve out their career paths. We have no restrictions on how many auditions people can take, and there are many opportunities at each stage. We are preparing currently for the rest of the 2025-2026 season, but we have an incredible array of orchestras coming in the 26-27 season as well. So please make sure you check us out and check out all the different opportunities that are available. And I want to show a little live concert clip of these different co-orchestra opportunities and different orchestras that are available. And so please enjoy this clip. So as you see, there are a lot of different opportunities that are given to these amazing musicians from all over the world. They're not just, a specific town. They're also these incredible orchestras that are supporting musicians from all over the world. And I want to stress that this is such an incredible opportunity that you don't want to miss out. You don't want to miss out on these amazing opportunities to play with orchestras. And you can see that we don't just feature like a pianist and violinist only. There's like euphonium, there's singers, there are vocalists from all over the world. There are different instruments and different kind of concerts put together. And I like the idea of an orchestra serving young musicians and giving them an opportunity to play in a big space, in a really big hall with a full orchestra. It's an invaluable experience so that when they grow up and do bigger competitions with bigger orchestras, they have some sort of sense of stability. So if you have students, if you're a music lover and you're a musician who want these opportunities, please check our website and write to us, comment, and we will definitely respond. We will try to get you onto our upcoming season and many other seasons coming up. We also have started, very excitingly, a new Beethoven project. We're featuring Beethoven Symphony number 7 now. We've actually started this project quite a while back, and this is an opportunity to actually feature different Beethoven symphonies and talk about them, along with a fantastic documentary narrated by Lawrence Rapchak, who is an incredible music educator who has presented very detailed each movement of Beethoven's 9 symphonies. We've done the 5th symphony, we've done the 6th, we've done the 1st and 2nd, and now we're doing the 7th. So this is really truly exciting, an opportunity to experience these wonderful symphonies and look at them in terms of the architecture of how everything comes together, but also in terms of the historical, the social, and the cultural context behind these symphonies. It's fascinating, really, for me and Dr. Anna Ospensky to discuss and to make some comments, just so that there's some sort of review, some sort of discussion about what he's talking about. And it's been honestly so interesting for me. So along with Architects of Music, Nubian Productions, and Virtual Concert Halls, this documentary narrated by Lawrence Rapchak is a really wonderful way to learn more about your favorite pieces of music, especially the Beethoven symphonies. And with that, I want to give a big thanks to our team. We're about to start a video and show you a recording by Theodore Kuchar, and this is a big thanks to our team who have been just integral in making sure projects and recordings and documentaries and shows and productions such as this are available. And so if you're interested in helping us, we are definitely looking for more assistance in terms of financial help, but also subscribers and audience, people like you to watch these shows, give us what you think, and to be a part of hopefully this new generation of artists out there. So without further ado, let's play this wonderful video. This is Thomas de Hartmann, a wonderful composer's Violin Concerto Opus 66. This is a US premiere performed by Andrei Tchaikovsky on the violin, and with the wonderful orchestra, Lviv National Philharmonic Orchestra of Ukraine, of course, conducted by Maestro Theodore Kuchar. Enjoy. Wow, that was Thomas the Hartmann's Violin Concerto. You heard the third and the fourth, well, second, third, and fourth movements of this wonderful concerto, Opus 66, performed by Andriy Tchaikovsky, as well as the Lviv National Philharmonic Orchestra of Ukraine, conducted by Theodore Kuchar. And this was performed quite recently, actually, maybe around 2 years ago, at the University of Massachusetts, Amherst. So, with that, we're going to conclude our show. You heard a wonderful interview with Maestro Kuchar, which we're going to do more of, actually. I think it's a really fascinating person to interview, and he is just full of wonderful stories. You heard this wonderful performance, and just a final plug to check out colORCHESTRA auditions. We are having more auditions coming up, and would love for you to be a part of them. This is an opportunity for you to perform with orchestra, whether you're a musician of whatever you play, whichever instrument, instrumentalists, vocalists, we welcome everybody. And so with that, this is a opportunity that you don't want to miss, because playing with orchestra is such a joy, and we have many different locations, orchestras, and opportunities from around the world. Thank you for joining us today. It's been such a pleasure. I want to give a big hand to our team behind the scenes, our producers, head of production, as well as, of course, all of we see on the screen, our co-founders, our wonderful people who put all of these incredible shows together and make sure that everything works out. And as well, one important thing is they manage all the live auditions, live performances that happen. And so there's more shows coming up. There's more things happening next week. I believe our team is headed to New York, to Carnegie Hall. So there's so many exciting things that are happening within our wonderful company. And if you'd like to join us, please check our website. Please contact us, like and subscribe, and make a comment to get in touch with us. With that, we'll see you next time. Thank you again. Bye for now.